Well, we talked about how hard it is to focus on eating right through the holidays and through quarantine, but we also know that there's a lot on people's minds, and our mental well-being is so important right now. And here joining me today is, thank you so much for being here, Chelsea.
Thank you.
We've talked a lot lately over
have.
the pandemic
Yes.
because mental health is so important, and it's been a big focus on people's overall well-being during the pandemic. So we're talking about, we know that the pandemic has brought on extra stressors, but what about the holidays? Because we know that there's seasonal depression and extra stressors that come along with Christmas and Thanksgiving. How do people manage all of this? It's a lot.
Yeah. And I think when it comes to the holidays, that's the number one thing, kind of like you talked about, is the demands, right? Holidays are such an exciting time, but sometimes the excitement is a little bit diminished because of the demands. And so now on top of it with the pandemic, there's some extra, what should I do? What's right? What's not right? And I think it goes really back to, what do you normally do? And maybe modifying those, traditions or whatnot, but not forgetting the reason for the season. I know we hear that term a lot, but what do you normally do that brings you joy during these seasons, and preparing for that?
Yeah, I just wanted to buy a shirt the other day that said choose joy, because it's so true. If you focus on the good and the positive, it's a lot easier to get through the day.
Yes.
We also talked about controlling what you can control, focusing on that. That's been a big message that you have promoted during this pandemic. And why is that so important for people? Because I know that we're all struggling to kind of just really cope with it all. When is this going to be over? When can I see my friends and family? When can I just do normal things that I once enjoyed? Why is that so important to focus on what we can control?
Control is something that provokes anxiety when we do not have control. A lot of times what we hear is, when I feel like I can't control something, that's when my anxiety or the depression might be the worst. So I always say control the controllables. What can we control in this situation? A lot of times it's kind of like the old metaphor, worries like a rocking chair, you rock and you rock, but you don't go anywhere. And that's so very true, because we think of the what ifs or kind of the, if I don't do this, then this is going to happen and this is going to happen. And then what happens is we end up worrying about things that aren't even going to happen. So what can we do in this moment to control my next steps? And that's what I really encourage everybody to stop and think, what can I do right now that's going to determine my next step?
Going back to the holidays, we're all used to either going to gatherings or hosting gatherings. And how can you deal with demanding relatives that, maybe you're being really safe with COVID and you're following all of the guidelines, and maybe your relative or your friend doesn't see it that way? How can you deal with those demands?
Yeah. And that's a great question, because it has come up a lot. I think it's going back to what you believe in and setting those boundaries, understanding that everybody has their own view of what the current situation is and how they're handling it. And it really goes back to what is right for you. If you choose to do something that isn't right for you or what you don't believe in, chances are you're not going to be enjoying it anyways. So really explaining to your relatives, and, I would love for you to be here. This is just a difficult time right now. And for myself and my family, this is what we are going to do. And, maybe when this is over, we can have our traditions or we can have a gathering. But for right now, in order to keep everybody safe and for us to be able to enjoy it, this is something that we're going to do.
This came in from a viewer. How do I not feel down about not having big family get-togethers? Family traditions can't happen this year, and that's really hard.
It is. Yeah. And I think that is something that's going to be very difficult, because really these are the first major holiday seasons that we're going into during this pandemic. And I think a lot of it is feeling down, but then also, how do we explain to our children? How do we explain to other family members? And remember, it goes back to controlling the controllables. But what can we do right now that still brings us joy? If waking up on Christmas morning or waking up on Thanksgiving morning, and the tradition might be that I'm cooking a turkey with grandma, somehow still trying to incorporate that if grandma can't be there. Can grandma be there on a Zoom call? Can grandma still be there somehow on Christmas morning? And understanding that it is okay to feel a little sad. These are a lot of changes that are thrown at us that we're not used to. So allow yourself to feel down, allow yourself to feel sad for a little bit, and then move forward with the things that you want to still do.
We talked about sadness. What about the guilt? Maybe that you're not including grandma and grandpa this year, or you've decided to decline their invitation for a get together. How do you deal with that guilt that you feel?
I think give yourself a little grace, which is really difficult to do, especially, maybe if you're one hosting and you have a lot of those demands, or these are the things that I'm used to doing. But understanding that if we don't experience the guilt and we don't talk about it, a lot of times it can turn to some frustrations and even resentment. So really working through that and talking with your family member and saying, Grandma, I do feel guilty that you can't be here, and I'm sorry. But right now, in order for us to be able to have future gatherings in the future and to be together, this is the best decision for us.
Mm-hmm. Why might I seem to be angry or on edge all the time? I think this goes back to anxiety.
Yeah.
I feel like when I have anxiety, I'm very irritable.
Yes.
So why might I feel that way?
Irritability and being on edge are key indicators of anxiety and depression. And I think one of the biggest things is we have to look at what is all changing around us, whether it's your kids going to in-person school one day and remote learning the next day, or maybe you're in the office one day and the next day you're not. Everything around us is so rapidly changing that sometimes we don't feel like we have both feet on the ground before the next step changes again. So, anxiety does bring around irritability and maybe on edge, and it's recognizing that. And when you're recognizing that you're a little bit more irritable, putting in good practices, whether it's sleep hygiene, relaxation, exercise, those types of
We're going to be
things.
talking about sleep hygiene coming up. So thank you for mentioning that. What are some signs that our level of stress and anxiety, or maybe even the winter blues and depression, are more than we can handle on our own? When do we know to ask for help?
Great question. I think a lot of it comes down to when it's to the point that it's impairing your day-to-day functioning. When it's to the point that you can't get through your daily tasks without maybe, feeling down, anxious, irritable, you've tried to do things to cope with it, nothing's helping. Sometimes some of my clients will say, my husband really started to notice that I wasn't happy or I was anxious, or I started to feel more weight on me, or my kids and said, Mom, why are you upset all the time? Sometimes when those closest to us kind of bring up those, questions, then maybe we take a step back and say, is this a little bit more than what I can handle on my own?
I also wanted to touch on the little ones, kids.
Yes.
The holidays and the traditions that follow for kids, that's everything.
Yes.
We all look back on our memories of growing up. So how can you still make the holidays, special for them? And maybe it's not going to look the same, but what are some ways that you can still really bring the joy?
The one thing I love about children is how resilient they are. They truly are so resilient. And when you look at the children right now, they've adapted to so much in such, a short amount of time. So I think it's not forgetting about the traditions and the fun things that you normally do, and understanding that it's okay to have those conversations, those true, honest conversations of, right now we can't do this because of this, but we still can do this. And keeping those memories and those traditions alive and still making it fun for them. Kids are concrete thinkers. They are meant to be, in the moment. And a lot of times they don't think way ahead. So if it's about what are we doing right now that can help them through this, and talking very rationally, but to their level, chances are they're going to be okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chelsea, for all the advice. We're so happy you're here. And again, if you or someone is showing signs of severe depression or anxiety or struggling, call our helpline. That number is at the bottom of your screen, 402-717-HOPE.